Hello, my name is Tyler Gallagher. I'm the owner and operator of Seraphim Bread in Salina, Kansas. We have been open for 3 years now, and we specialize in retail breads, sourdough breads, sweet rolls, pastries, and also lunch and sandwich items. We try to use as many local ingredients as we can, things that we can source from in Kansas. We do have great products come out of Kansas, especially our flour. Heartland Mills in Marienthal, Kansas is our primary flour items that we use, along with like our dairy from Hildebrand Farms in Junction City, and of course using local farmers to get a lot of our produce most of the year. Of course, for the ingredients we give to you, we have our sourdough starter and our flour that we'll be providing for you, but of course you're also going to need just a little bit of water, tepid tap water, or anything that distilled water would be the best. But of course, water out of your tap that's set for a while at room temperature would be just as great. Of course, salt, iodized salt, or kosher salt, whatever you see fit and like that. Mixing bowl to mix it in with a mixing spoon. I recommend either using like a digital scale, but of course we can have these transferred into different elements so you can just size with measuring cups. We have one of our bench knife right here. It's going to use for cutting the dough. There, digital thermometer to test your dough's temperature. Bread lame or a knife that you could use, and that'll be used for cutting the dough to make nice slits. Little pan for extra flour for dusting. And then any of your proofing bowls that you like to use for proofing your bread, depending on what size or shape that you'd like to have your bread. You can either have a traditional bread pan or a proofing basket, an oval, or for whatever one that you kind of like to use. And then I like to use a little optional extra duster. This is a little bit of rice flour, kind of coats on the extra dust. Little plastic wrap that you can to cover your dough to keep it from drying out. You can use plastic wrap or just use like a dishcloth there. We will also be using a little water pan inside our oven to have a little bit of moisture, which will kind of show when we go to baking. So what we have here is a quart that you're going to be receiving for your sourdough bread starter, about 500 grams of our sourdough starter. This is the main ingredient and what we use in all sourdoughs and levain doughs. We give it, which gives it all of its flavor, texture, and its yeast rising elements. So with your sourdough culture, if you want to keep that and keep feeding that, what I'd like to suggest is a 1:1:1 ratio of starter, flour, and water. So of course, if you have this amount starter, I would add equal parts amount of water to equal parts amount of flour by weight and mix that together. And of course, you want to let that sit there, and it should take about 8 hours to ferment and get healthy to a nice, it should start bubbling and get about double in size that you would want to, and until it looks really nice, bubbly, and good. But I want to beware about letting it go too far and letting it die when it, of course, at some point it will burst and start to kind of deflate back down, which knows you've kind of gone a little too far, which is a little bit more acidic than you'd like. It's just a little too much of the acid pH balance getting too much for it and starts to actually break back down. So we have a sure sourdough starter. It's gonna be nice, bubbly, and you can see that it's kind of smooth. All right, so we're gonna get started and start making our sourdough bread. We're gonna start with the first step, which is gonna be making our Autolyse. So we're gonna start with our warm water, about 430 grams or 2 cups of warm water, and about 4 cups of high gluten bread flour, and about a cup of stone ground whole wheat, which we have in this bowl. And we're just gonna start the Autolyse process by just adding the water and the flour and mixing it in. What this is going to do with our Autolyse is just going to start the gluten reaction, which of course the combination of flour and water reaction. So we're just going to get right in there and start mixing it up with your hand. It's kind of a big gloopy mess, but we're just going to incorporate all that water into the flour, and it's going to turn it into a dough. We're just going to mix it for about a minute. Your hand's going to get real sticky. It's going to get all over you, but that's okay because that's part of baking, is getting your hands dirty. Just going to fold it over each other. Really get all that flour incorporated. That, take all the bits off your fingers. Of course, just like that, we're just going to have a mound of water and flour and dough. What we're going to do, we're just going to let that sit, put that in a nice warm place, and we're going to let that sit for about 2 hours to kind of develop. It's going to get stretchy and elastic over time. Take a look at it, and then in the meantime, we'll prepare our sourdough mother. After a couple hours, we've let our Autolyse sit there, and of course you can go and check it. And of course what we have now is going to be something that's going to be a lot more elastic and stretchy. You see where previously you mixed it and it's going to be this. This is what the gluten development in the process of Autolyse is going to do. It's going to build that strength and kind of make it real elasticy like this. It's kind of a cool process that you can kind of use. Very interesting. This is, of course, what gluten development really is. It's just a network, mesh layers, connectivity that it creates on itself. And so what we're going to do in the mixing process and making the dough is, of course, start incorporating our cultures where that net starts encapsulating our yeast, and that's what's going to make the dough rise. And we're going to go ahead and start mixing our sourdough culture and start making our proof bread dough that we have. So we're going to take our Autolyse, kind of break it up off your bowl so it's not entirely sticking. That we're going to kind of stretch it out until it's kind of flat against the bowl. It's going to have this. We're going to have our sourdough starter, which is nice and mature, kind of warmed up. And we're going to start adding right on top of this. If you have a mixing bowl, you can add this right under your mixing bowl. Use a little dough hook, save you a little hand trouble. Be a little bit easier, but we're going to do this one by hand just so that everyone can be able to do this one at home. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to start mixing this up first. Use a little spoon. It's a little gloopy at first, so it saves you on making such of a mess. But don't worry about making too much of a mess. It's part of the act. Now, if you want to have it and you think that your hands are getting real messy, you can have just like a little bowl of water that you can kind of wash your hands off with. Usually I have a little extra towel, kind of keep your fingers didn't get real nice and messy. Of course, you don't really want to be touching a lot of other stuff. And we're just going to start working that with our hands. Start the kneading process, which of course is taking one side and just stretching it over the other. And we're just going to start trying to work these two together. So it'll be coconut doughy at first. And what you're looking for is trying to get a nice even mixture, an even like look to it. Now when you have this and it's a little bit easier to handle, a little more worked in, we're going to just move this to our table, which you could have any kind of table that's nice and clean and easy to work with. Something that's easy to clean up at the end because, of course, we get kind of messy there. And we're going to start kneading this dough. Of course, everyone knows the process of kneading it. After we get it kind of mixed in two, we're also going to add our salt. So with salt, we're just going to add that right on top. Of course, in your mixing bowl, after you get it started, you just kind of just add in your salt. Make sure to add it in there. If you don't add your salt, it's just going to take very plain. Now it's going to be real nice and wet. Of course, the sourdoughs are usually a lot wetter of a dough than normal bread. But that, of course, you want to add just a little bit of flour at a time to kind of have that little extra crunch. But you don't want to add too much flour to mix because you don't want to take the ratio off. See, as you work it, it's going to start coming to more of a shape that you really like. There's more texture. That's going to start looking like dough, less like a gloopy mess. And what I like to do is, of course, push down to that, pull up, and then fold it over. That's the process of kneading it. That kind of gets it all together. A little more flour to kind of keep it from sticking. And we're just going to work this dough. We're not going to go just to mixing it. We're just going to keep that process of gluten development going. It's 10 minutes by hand or by using a mixer. What that's going to do, the friction of working it's going to actually raise the temperature a little bit. It's going to help that, and it's also going to make sure that everything is nice and worked in with each other. Of course, at the same time, we're also building more gluten as we're mixing it and making sure all the salt starter is uniformly. Of course, we have mix. It's going to be a nice little ball. And notice it's going to get kind of a little bit tough, a little more ball-shaped. It's not going to be so sticky to your surface. It's going to start wanting to kind of come off. It does stick a little bit, but I would just use your bench knife and kind of clean yourself up. We are using the same flour for this. Any of this stuff could just be any kind of regular flour that you'd want to use. Doesn't necessarily that, as long as you're not adding too much that's going to change the complete ratios of your flour. So by this time, your dough should be looking pretty nice. It should be starting to look pretty smooth. If it's still pretty rough, it's got a lot of rough bits in that, it still need to be worked out. But what we're trying to look for is a real nice, smooth product. It should look pretty uniformly that, and nice, good shape like that. Looks like a nice ball of dough. The salt is not don't need any specialized kind of salt or anything like that. Some people really like to be careful about their salt, using all sea salt or that. Just make sure the ratio is kind of what you need to use. Kosher salt could be a little bit grainier, so make sure you get there and make sure it gets extra work. I like to use a little bit of a finer salt, and that helps to kind of dissolve it a little better. Salt content I use is 1%. I use salt as compared to the rest of your dough. That's 1% of your ratio. And that should be able to get enough salt that it seasons it, but not going to be too salty. Or no salt at all, which is just kind of lack flavor. All right. Well, to the point where this is nice and smooth, and you can see it as you pull it. And it's kind of nice smooth, and you'll see the strands of gluten all kind of hold to each other. I really like that speckled look with that little bit of stone ground wheat. That's what I really like, that kind of little flavor. But you can, of course, making a sourdough, you can use it with any sort of ratios of whole grain wheat to regular white flour, rye, or any of that. It's really good with that, or any other ingredients you want to kind of add. Now that we have our dough all mixed up and ready in that, we are ready to start proofing and then doing our stretch and folds process. So you get your mixing bowl back. I clean it out of a little bit, and then we're gonna spray that with just a little bit of pan spray. Keep that from sticking, make your life a lot easier. Just gonna take that up, and we are just going to place that in here. There's a little flip around, so that it gets all that, keeps it from drying out. And then we're going to put just a little dry kitchen towel and put that over the top, keep it from drying out. And we're just gonna let that rest in a nice warm space for about 30 minutes, and then we're gonna do our first stretch and fold. All right, well, it's been 30 minutes that we've let this sit, proof a little bit, and we're gonna check on it now. We're gonna do our first fold turn. So of course we have this right here. It's looks like it's starting to get a little bit more rounded, but you can see it's gonna be kind of a little flat, just kind of sit there dense there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make folds in it. Folds are gonna be kind of what you're used to, like intermesh the glutens and stretch that, which is gonna help it build a bigger body. But what we're gonna do is stretch this. If it's a little bit sticky in that, make it a little sticky on your hands. What I suggest is get your hands wet. If you have a little, I have a little bowl of water right here, or you just kind of run your hands under a sink and just get a little wet. That's actually going to keep the dough from sticking to you. So what we're going to do is you can take a corner of this dough and we're going to stretch it as far as we can. You see the dough's got this nice elasticity, and then we're just going to fold it over that. And then we're just going to quarter turn it. Next one, stretch it as far as we can. Don't try to rip the dough. We want to make sure it's nice and long, but this is going to stretch it out and then fold it back over. Repeat the process about 2 more times, just a little quarter turn until it does it. You'll notice that after you do it about the 4th time, it's not going to be as stretchy anymore. It's going to start, resisting a little more, and that's good. And just fold it on top of each other, and then cover it back up. And we're just gonna let it sit. We're gonna do this at least 2 more times. Do that every 30 minutes. We're ready for our 3rd fold, which went to the eggs. And of course you see that it's starting to rise and get a little bit bitter. But as we get our hands wet, we go again, it's gonna be much stronger. You're gonna have more gluten development right here. Of course, this is gonna be our final fold before we go into actual just proofing and letting it rest. We're gonna let it rest for another couple hours to kind of really rise up there. What all those folds are gonna do is gonna develop those pockets, which can allow a lot of air bubbles to hold itself into when we rise it up. In the stage of this is actually kind of a proofing. We're doing what we call an ambient proof, which is proofing at room temperature or any warmer temperatures, where you're gonna let the natural air rise it up. You can also cold proof, which a lot of people and a lot of sourdough bakeries will do, which will actually proof them in the refrigerator, and they can proof them overnight. That's an option that is definitely possible to do. Usually that, I wouldn't suggest anything that you would do it more than 18 hours though, because you would actually end up, over developing it there. But of course, that's a great way of doing it if you want to make bread and then having it ready overnight. This is a great way you can do it. You can have it like this. You can put it in your refrigerator, but we're gonna let it go in a little time, like we're going to make bread and have it in another few hours. All right, well, now that we've completed all our folds and shaping on that, we've let the dough rest for another couple of hours until it's about ready to be shaped and made into bread loaves. So, of course, as we've noticed, when we look at it too, it's going to be kind of fairly risen, and you're going to start seeing big air bubbles that are going to pop. That's really nice. It's going to show your development and your yeast that's really kind of kicking up into it. And so it's kind of ready to go. So to get this out, we want to be very gentle with it from now on. Little difference between commercial loaves and sourdough is it just doesn't rise as fast. You can tell by the length of time. So we want to keep as much air in that bread as we can. So we're going to handle it a lot gentler than usual. So what we're going to do, we're just going to slide your dough out on a little bit of floured surface. You're going to make sure that you're not going to be stretching it or ripping at the dough. That should make about 2 loaves. So what I like to do is take your bench knife so that you're not tearing it or anything like that, and we're just going to be making nice cuts. That. It's going to be a little bit sticky and hard to deal with. You just want to make quick jabbing motions at it. Keep it from sticking to your hands and sticking to that. It just takes a little bit of practice to kind of get those baker's hands. But don't be worried if you get a little bit messy. So what I like to do is I get loaves, and we're going to go into a pre-shaping form. Since we already have a little flour on this, I like to turn it over. And then you kind of see that it's a little bit flattened of this. What I like to do, there's different techniques of doing it, is we're going to try to fold it up. Okay, so we kind of take it like kind of holding a blanket, nice warm blanket. And you're going to kind of fold it over. And then the other side, stretch and kind of fold it over too. Real gently. And then we take it, we just kind of roll it up, kind of like a nice pillowy sleeping bag. And keep all that air and those bubbles in there. You get those really nice open crumb when you have sourdough bread. It's by having all those big air bubbles in there. Again, this one. Now you can try it with a little different technique. On this one, some people like to kind of do a little cross way of doing it. Or it just kind of makes simple. It's kind of the same thing. And then just roll it right up. Now from here, I like to just let it sit and rest for a minute. What it does is, of course, the bread will like to slack. As you notice, it'll kind of slack back down. And that's all right. It's kind of typical notion of bread making. But we want to kind of let it just sit there, and then we kind of can tighten it back up to get it to put it in our proofing bowl. Now from here, making sourdough, it just kind of gets in your own personal way of you wanting to do it. Now that we have the dough, you can kind of mix and match to what kind of shape or size or how you want to do this. We want to proof this for later today to make for dinner tonight, or we can actually shape it and proof it and make it for tomorrow. And that's kind of where the luxury and the funness goes. And it's really just a personal reason. Usually, like if you see at Seraphim Bread, we like to make it in our sandwich loaves. People just like it like that. So we use kind of a nice sandwich loaf pan like this, nice bread loaf pan. Or you can use circular proofing basket. It's going to be really good to use. What it does is, of course, it's going to sit here final proof, and it's going to make whatever shape that you like it for cutting the best stuff. So here, after letting it gently sit, we're going to take it like this, what we have here is we have a bowl of rice flour, which is kind of a common thing bakeries like to use. You get that nice little topping that you kind of put a little element that you see those fancy designs and stuff people use. They usually like a really fine flour or usually like rice flour. What this is going to do is going to have it and help it from sticking to any of your proofing baskets. That too kind of helps it from being too sticky. Sometimes if you have too sticky of a dough, it can be a real pain to get out of these, and then ends up popping your thing and you'll get a flat bread dough. And we don't really want that. We want to make nice, shiny, beautiful dough. So what I try to do when you're working with dough is you want to kind of use your scraper and scrape it under real quick. It's going to help kind of push it in this. And then we kind of plop down basket. Mix it around. And then what we want to do is kind of hold it, not with our hands or use that, but more kind of with these parts of your hands right here, which is going to help lift it without sticking too many indentions in there. If you're putting in a proofing basket, put that top side down because we're going to be flipping that out of it later. Or if you're using it in the bread pan, I'll actually turn it around and letting it sit like this. All right, now they're in there. We're just going to put a little nice towel over the top of it or plastic wrap, whatever you see fit, just to keep it from drying out. You don't want the crust to get too dry as you're proofing it. You want to put this in a nice warm spot for the next couple of hours till it doubles in size and the size you want. Or if you want to go from here, you can actually put this in your refrigerator and hold this overnight and actually slow proof it, what you call by retarding dough or that, or slow proof. You can actually do it the next day and that, but I would not recommend holding it for more than 18 hours, or it would just get too overproofed, fall apart, or too acidic, and then it'll end up falling. But it's a really nice way, a lot of bakeries will be able to do that. What we like to do is called an ambient proof here at Seraphim Bread, where we actually proof it at normal room temperature or warmer like that. So we'll let these proof for a couple hours, and then we're gonna stick them in the oven and bake them. So we're having our bread enter its final proof stage. You want to be preheating your oven to about 450 degrees Fahrenheit. These are our ovens that we use. Of course, you can use any of your ovens at home, but we're going to have a little setup for this. So, of course, as it's proven, we'll get this up to 450 degrees. We'll get this up here, and then, of course, we're going to add a little water or pan to do. So we have a pan we have in here. It's kind of our little way of doing it, and we're just going to add a little water to this pan at least 20 minutes before you add your bread to it. What this is going to do is heat up. It's going to create a lot of moisture in your oven. Of course, moisture is really good for bread making. With that, it actually helps to create a crispier crust. With a lot of moisture into it, it's actually going to like help to heat it with all that heat. You get a nice crispy crust and lots of color of that. Usually in the big other bakeries like that, they're going to have a steam injection oven. But of course, you can be able to use this if you have like your little home oven. I just get a little pan of oven or a little pan, put it on the bottom rack, a little bit of water in there, and then of course you have your stone or whatever you're going to be putting your bread over the top of that. Like that. All right, well, it looks like our bread is good and ready to start. One way to check to see if your bread is ready to go is a little touch test. You always want to kind of put it about a ½ inch of your finger in there. If it springs back up really fast, it's not ready to go in, still going in. But if it doesn't spring back really fast at all, it kind of slowly comes back, that means it's about ready. It's going to be nice and about as full of about as much air as you can get. So of course, if you have your little bread pan or you're about ready to go, or if we want to take it out of a little pan that's in our proofing basket, we're going to need to flip that out. I have, of course, a bread peel, or if any type of thing you would like to do, if you want to put it on a piece of parchment paper or anything like that, it kind of helps to move it to get it into your oven. Whether you're going to put it on a stone or on a bread pan or in a Dutch oven, it's kind of best to do this. So what I do is I kind of just like to slowly lift that one over until it's nice in there. You don't want to be too rough with it, because of course you could pop it and then you're just going to have a flat bread. And what we're going to do is we're going to score the loaf. Scoring is actually a good way to loaf, because over the time when you start baking your loaf, the gases are going to expand immediately with that first burst of heat, and it's going to expand the loaf. Well, with crust forming immediately, it's going to break somewhere. What you're doing is purposely breaking the crust. It gives it a really nice shape and that. But of course, if you don't, you're just going to see a lot of breakage around the sides, usually around the bottoms like that. So what we do is have a bread lame like this, which is a little razor blade. If you can get a razor blade at home, or just a really sharp paring knife, usually works just as well. What we do is like to just score this knife nice, like this. Don't have to go too hard, but just kind of score it open there. Or if you want here, just take the sharp edge. We just want to score a nice little mark. What that's going to do is pop up and give it a little ear when we bake it. What I like to do, a little squirt bottle, a little wet like there. It's going to help give it a little more color. Kind of steam it as you go. And pop it right in the oven. After we put this in here, we're going to add a little bit of extra moisture to it. So of course I have a little bit of ice cubes if you want to add those in there. Ice cubes kind of good because they melt kind of slower and they add a lot of humidity to it. Or if you have a squirt bottle, a little squirt gun to it. Add the humidity of that. Shut the door so it keeps all the humidity inside. And at least you want to at least keep this closed for at least 10 minutes. But we're going to let this set for about 30 minutes. Check out this bread when it comes out. All right, let's see what we got here. Ooh. Yeah, hot. It's nice, fresh, hot loaf of sourdough bread. And of course, we have our those two. Of course, one thing to look at when it is all finished, if you look at the bottom side of your loaf, if it's nice and golden color, it's nice and good. And also if it taps like a drum, call it a timpano, like that, it's usually a good sign. It smells good. Of course, it smells great. With any fresh bread, just give it a little 15 minutes, 20 minutes to cool off. Be very fresh and ready to eat. Of course, if you're wanting to slice it into sandwich loaves, I would let it cool down completely, at least a couple hours to be able to slice it. You can be able to do it, but since it's so nice and moist, it's just gonna fall apart, nice and crusty. But if you want it nice and crusty, eat it for dinner. This is just about as good. Oh, yeah. All right. There we are. We have sourdough bread.